You know what? I've been talking about the Mario series a lot lately. I feel like I'm getting stuck in a rut. Let's talk about something else for a change, like, dollhouses. Yeah, seriously, dollhouses. So, to begin with, a dollhouse is a toy model of a house that's built on the scale of a doll, typically around 1/12 the size of an actual house in every dimension. The basic concept is extremely old, going back at least to the days of ancient Egypt. But for most of its existence, it was associated exclusively with royalty, and made for some ritual or symbolic purpose, not just for fun. This began to change during the late Renaissance in Northern Europe, when a few aristocrats and wealthy merchants started commissioning elaborate house models to be made and furnished with impeccably crafted miniature furniture, dishware, paintings, basically everything these people had in their actual houses, just on a tiny scale. In England, these were known as baby houses, not because babies were allowed anywhere near them, they were too expensive for that, but just as an indicator of their size. We use the same idea today for things like baby carrots or a baby grand piano. These early dollhouse owners were intense about their hobby. One of their creations, when fully decorated, could easily cost as much as a real townhouse, and not a cheap one either. At the same time, though, less expensive single-room models, usually of a kitchen, were circulated among the slightly less wealthy set. And with the coming of the Industrial Revolution and the age of mass production fueled by it, the two products converged in the form of the modern dollhouse, usually sparsely furnished and made for play, not display, sold at prices that many ordinary people could now afford. That's excluding the truly poor, of course, who could scarcely afford toys of any kind. In 19th century art, a dollhouse was often seen as a symbol of the privileges of wealth, the kind of thing that a pampered child might be given for Christmas. The equivalent symbol for a poor child would be not a dollhouse, but a doll, something that could be carried around and would last a while even if treated roughly. Now, both of these toys do require a fair amount of imagination. You can play with a doll in much the same way you'd play with a dollhouse. If the dollhouse is a more entertaining toy, that's just because there's more detail in it for your imagination to work on, more to see and incorporate into the story that develops as you play. Dolls and dollhouses are very compatible toys. It's right there in the name, really. So it was only a matter of time before someone figured out how to exploit the potential of combining the two ideas, making a dollhouse that was cheaper and more portable, with included dolls and props sized to work with it, a miniature of a miniature, as it were. And that's exactly what English toymaker Chris Wiggs did in 1983, when he built a dollhouse into the case of a powder compact to go along with a little doll that he had made for his daughter, which would become the prototype of a hugely successful toy that first appeared on store shelves around the world in 1989 under the name Polly Pocket. A typical Polly Pocket toy was a plastic clamshell case, outwardly resembling a powder compact, and containing inside its two halves a detailed landscape, usually with a house on the top half and an outdoor area of some kind on the bottom. Along with the playset came a simple plastic doll with a hinge in the middle. You could either sit it down on the scenery or place it in one of several divots that would let it stand up. The genius of this toy was its balance of simplicity and detail. These playsets were mass-produced by injection molding, like most action figures, and the painting was comparable in quality to a contemporary action figure too. But it wasn't being used to define a single character, it was defining a space for characters to exist in. The dolls that came with the playset were cheap and disposable, but that didn't matter because they lived in such an interesting place, and the price for admission to this place was much less than for similarly detailed playworlds like Barbie's. Polly Pocket reversed a trend that had taken the toy world by storm in the early 80s. Accessories sold separately. Masters of the Universe, G.I. Joe, and yes, Barbie, went all in on the upselling of customers, offering a huge range of overpriced knickknacks without which your doll or action figure's life would not be complete. Toy manufacturers took the obsessive attitude that real adults applied to filling their houses with stuff and encouraged kids to imagine their plastic friends doing the same thing. It was beyond egregious, and the forces of pop culture and parody definitely noticed. But with Polly Pocket, one purchase gave you the playset and the doll together. You didn't need separately sold accessories because the accessories were built into the toy. Rather than buying a new outfit for Polly, you just put her in a new part of the house and a new story unfolded. It encouraged whoever was playing it to be imaginative, without suggesting that more money was required to fully utilize your imagination. Now, back in the 90s, when all this was happening, I obviously was not playing with Polly Pocket, because boys did not play with dollhouses or dolls. That was girl stuff. What I was into was Mighty Max, a product made several years later by the same company, but now aimed at a young male audience. Mighty Max was a kid with an M on his shirt and his baseball cap tilted to the side, who went around fighting giant bugs and aliens in a series of doom zones. Did I mention this was in the 1990s? It was cool and edgy, and it distracted you from the fact that these doom zones weren't all that different from the Polly Pockets your kid sister was playing with at the same time. Looking back, I think we can acknowledge that my Mighty Max toys were just another kind of dollhouse, in the same way that action figure is really just how you say doll to a little boy so he won't make a comical grimace and throw the toy in the corner to distance himself from the cootie germs. Mighty Max didn't exist for nearly as long as Polly Pocket, but it was a big deal for the few years it stuck around. The toy line was successful enough to spawn a 2-season children's cartoon and a really terrible video game, which is everything a second-string toy franchise from the 90s could reasonably hope for. And when it ended in 1996, the toy aisle lost something truly unique. But, luckily for me, this would not be the end of elaborate virtual dollhouses for boys. Oh no. In the same year, a product was released with playscapes more intricate than Mighty Max could have dreamed of, with the same meticulous attention to detail and the same sense of fun just from being in an imagined space. And even better, this wasn't just a plastic toy. It was the apex of 90s entertainment, a video game. That game was called Super Mario 64, and it's quite possibly the single most influential video game Nintendo ever made. Now you might think that my comparing Super Mario 64 to a collection of Mighty Max playsets is a little bit out there, but what you can't deny is that its gamey aspects, particularly the ones it shares in common with previous Mario games, were what the leading lights on this project were least interested in. In one of the Iwata Asks interviews that Satoru Iwata conducted with Shigeru Miyamoto, he explained that, as far as he was concerned, Super Mario 64 didn't even technically have to be a game to be worth experiencing. His primary interest was making a movement system that would be so much fun, by itself, that it would actually distract players from trying to complete objectives and reach the end of the experience. Legendarily, Miyamoto chose to spend the first couple of months of development fine-tuning Mario's movement by playing around with a basic test level, in which the only interactable objects were Mario and a little rabbit that he would run after and try to catch. He was assisted in this by two critically important subordinates, Yoshiaki Koizumi, an artist who developed new actions for Mario, and Yasunari Nishida, a system programmer who incorporated these actions into the simulation. Miyamoto made his ambitions for the project clear from the very beginning, telling Koizumi and Nishida that he wanted them to come up with as many different movements as they could for Mario. The way they interpreted this was that not only every button on the controller, but every combination of 2 button presses should be associated with a unique move. And sometimes they went even further than this, mapping advanced techniques to sequences of 3 button presses, or contextual prompts like being in midair. For those who played Super Mario 64 when it was new, the most incredible thing about the experience was probably that it was in 3D. But the second most incredible thing was how versatile Mario's moveset was. Jumping was no longer a simple matter of pressing A, or even a choice between 2 different kinds of jumps, like in Super Mario World. Now it mattered when you pressed A, the direction you were heading in, and what buttons you pressed just beforehand. Crouch and press A, and Mario would perform a backflip. But press A before you crouch, and the result was a ground pound, an attack maneuver with a totally different set of uses. Jumping 3 times in a straight line with good rhythm would let you make a ludicrously high triple jump, but a side jump would take you almost as high, and was much easier to pull off. Press B on the ground, and Mario would throw a simple punch, but do so in midair, and he'd kick, unless you were moving forward, in which case he'd swan dive toward the ground with incredible speed, swatting weak enemies out of the way in the process. Mario had always been known for the unusual height of his jumps. That's what gave him his original name, after all. But in this game, he's an acrobat. There's no other word that properly captures the speed and fluidity of his movements. But this moveset didn't exist in a vacuum. What really makes Super Mario 64 special is how interactive it is, the myriad different ways that Mario's jumps and attacks affect everything else. Your goal in this game isn't to make it to the end of a stage. The levels here don't even really have ends. But to explore and find hidden items in hard-to-reach places or locked behind special challenges. That's why I compared it to a dollhouse earlier, because the way you win this game is by examining all the details of little virtual worlds. Super Mario 64 is a very microcosmic game, in the sense that everything big in it grew out of something small. Mario's own moveset, which was worked out first, determined the nature of the challenges you face, and those challenges in turn determined the level design, with the game's overall goal being nothing more than completing a fixed number of challenges. The 15 main courses in Super Mario 64 weren't constructed using detailed models or blueprints. The team just took a basic concept for a level and started making it, altering the appearance and design on the fly as they came up with new ideas. Take the first course, Bob-Omb Battlefield, as an example. Designing this particular course well was of paramount importance to the game's success, because this is where every player would learn how to find and collect power stars. Heck, for a lot of people, this was the first time they would be learning how to do anything in a three-dimensional virtual space. Bob-Omb Battlefield is also one of the few parts of Super Mario 64, along with the Bowser stages and the first star in Dire Dire Docks, that you absolutely must accomplish something in to get to the end of the game. All of the other 13 courses are theoretically optional. To get to 70 stars, you have to go through many of them, but not any specific one. When the team first started work on Bob-Omb Battlefield, they envisioned a squarish map with a big hill in one corner, where you would fight the game's first boss, King Bob-Omb. A rushing river would divide the course in two and constitute the major obstacle that players would have to overcome to reach the boss fight. However, Miyamoto worried that a fast-moving water hazard might be too punishing for players who missed their jump, at least this early in the game. So the river was replaced with something that looks more like a dry riverbed. If you've ever wondered why there's a canyon in the middle of a grassy meadow, that's why. It's a reflection of the ad hoc, learn-as-you-go approach that Nintendo EAD took in designing every part of this game. Bob-Omb Battlefield is a microcosm of Super Mario 64 not only in its structure, but also in the nature of its challenges. There are 7 missions in this course, and each one represents a type of challenge that you'll see again and again as you play through the other courses. Fights against bosses or other powerful enemies, races against an NPC, environmental puzzles, basic platforming, platforming with a power-up, and 2 types of coin-collecting challenge. Big Bob-Omb on the Summit, the first mission, requires you to cross from one corner of the map to the other, climbing steadily upward as you do so. You have to deal with a few wandering Goombas, then an invincible and aggressive giant chain chomp to run past, and a tilting bridge that can dump you in the canyon if you're too slow in crossing it. Follow the sign through a gap in a huge iron fence, and you've made it to the main challenge of this mission, the hill. Super Mario 64 just loves its hills. 3 of its courses are entirely mountainous, and another 5 involve climbing up a tower, which isn't that different. But it's easy to see why the game is so obsessed with heights. This was the most spectacular way Nintendo could point out the difference between Mario's 2D past and the new possibilities offered by the N64. Simulating a 3D space where everything exists at the same height didn't technically require 3D rendering at all. You could just do it with an isometric perspective, as Nintendo had been demonstrating for years with The Legend of Zelda. A Link to the Past even managed to simulate 2 levels of height by letting you climb staircases inside certain rooms and using special programming to keep the enemies below from hitting you. The first-person shooter Doom, which many people considered 3D back in the 90s, didn't actually register differences in height at all. You could fire a shotgun into a wall and it would hit the demon standing on top of it. 1996 was the first year in which multiple prominent game releases were in true 3D, not just Super Mario 64, but also Tomb Raider and Quake. Unsurprisingly, all 3 of these games had a lot of verticality in them. Quake was full of elevators, Tomb Raider had you constantly descending through caverns and dungeons, and Super Mario 64, well, it just friggin' loved hills. The one in Bob-Omb Battlefield is the simplest in the game, for obvious reasons. The main challenge here is one of positioning, dodging the cannonballs that constantly roll down its slopes, while also making headway around the mountainside. There's also a few minor gaps to jump before you make it to the top, where King Bob-Omb awaits. The Mario series was no stranger to boss fights up to this point. Even the idea of a boss that's a bigger version of a common enemy wasn't unfamiliar. Pretty much all of the bosses in Yoshi's Island were that. But this was going one step further. King Bob-Omb, or Big Bob-Omb if you're a purist, isn't just a scaled-up Bob-Omb. He's a unique character, with his own moves and weaknesses, a distinct appearance, and most importantly to me, dialogue. Boss encounters are the only parts of Super Mario 64 that really sell the idea that something dramatic is going on. In contrast to the laid-back exploration that's typical of the minute-to-minute gameplay, encounters like King Bob-Omb are tense and exciting, and I think every one is a highlight of the experience. The uniqueness of these bosses as characters also ties into an interesting aspect of the second mission here, Foot Race with Koopa the Quick. When you land in Bob-Omb Battlefield this time, you'll notice right away that there's a big ol' Koopa just hanging around near the entrance, swinging his head around as if he's looking for something. If you approach him, he'll start a conversation which begins with the words, "Is it true you beat the Big Bob-Omb? Cool." I'm not overselling this snippet of dialogue when I say that this is something that had never happened in a Mario game before. The Mario tradition was that Koopas were just low-ranking foot soldiers in Bowser's army. For a decade, these guys were forgettable mooks, with the only noteworthy development of their character being when Super Mario World gave them all tank tops and a severe case of scoliosis. But Koopa the Quick is something more than a mere Koopa. He's not even just a big Koopa. He's a big, friendly Koopa who likes Mario and doesn't seem to care whether or not Bowser gets his way. He doesn't want to attack you, he just wants to race and see who's the fastest. And Super Mario 64 is actually full of these friendly, or at least neutral NPCs, who hint at the existence of a broader context behind the familiar Mario beats Bowser to save Peach formula. Super Mario 64 has very little plot-related drama, but it has a lot of what I would call background drama in its worlds. A lot of people forget this, but Bob-Omb Battlefield is supposed to be, a battlefield. That's why there's cannons shooting metal balls and water blasts all over the place, and why there are two varieties of Bob-Omb, the black ones that serve Bowser, and the pink Bob-Omb buddies who are on your side. The lore of this setting is that once you defeated King Bob-Omb, the battle was over, and more peaceful characters like Koopa the Quick are able to exist here. The cannons and the Bob-Omb buddies persist into later levels, but defeating the first boss is still treated by the game as a heroic act that should mean something to you. This is where the expanded moveset does so much to carry an otherwise dull story. Because you can now collect items, carry things, and move in all kinds of different ways, Mario is now characterized not just as a princess rescuer who stomps on turtles, but as a multifaceted adventurer who does lots of heroic things when the situation calls for it. He solves mysteries, and wins races, and visits enchanted castles, and brings back lost penguin babies, and solves labor disputes by attacking a guy with his butt. Okay, maybe that last one isn't exactly heroic, but it's interesting. If Super Mario 64's courses are like an elaborate virtual dollhouse, the various NPCs he interacts with are like the dolls you use to bring that dollhouse to life. Fighting King Bob-Omb feels a lot like a 6-year-old making his action figures fight by smashing them together, and racing Koopa the Quick feels like throwing those same action figures down the stairs and declaring whichever one hits the carpet first the winner. It's silly, but it also engages your imagination in a way that Mario never could before. Anyway, all of that is one reason why I like this second mission. But it's also true that racing Koopa the Quick is really engaging on a purely mechanical level. Because it requires you to reach the same point you've reached before, you have the opportunity to use tricks you may have learned while trying to get up to King Bob-Omb, or after he threw you off the mountainside. This isn't a difficult race at all, but the pressure is just enough to motivate you to find shortcuts, a useful habit to cultivate, since later courses also retread the same paths multiple times, and they get longer and longer as the game goes on, making it more and more tedious to progress if you don't play smart. This is an example of something previous Mario games could have done, but didn't. There are time trials in a lot of 2D games, from both before and after Super Mario 64, and they generally do a decent job of getting more fun out of a level you've already played. You could argue that this is filler, and previous Mario games didn't use it because they didn't need to. But remember Takashi Tezuka's golden rule: if it's fun, anything goes. And in a game where most players had a blast just moving Mario around, no one was going to rule out racing as a mission type just because it was too simple. Speaking of simple, the next mission, Shoot to the Island in the Sky, is possibly the easiest one in the whole game. All you have to do is talk to the Bob-Omb buddies to activate the course's 3 cannons, then use one of the 2 cannons closest to the island to blast yourself onto it, and bam, you're done. Depending on how uncharitable you're willing to be, you could put a lot of Super Mario 64's stars in the same generic platforming category as this one, which is basically just lying around somewhere waiting for you to pick it up. It's a difficult call in many cases, though. Is In the Deep Freeze from Snowman's Land just lying around? It's in an ice maze, but you can get through that in less than 30 seconds. How about Shocking Arrow Lifts from Wet Dry World? That's intended to be a tricky platforming challenge, but it can be bypassed with a single long jump. How about the ones at the top of mountain levels? Those are just lying around, but it's not easy to get to where they are. Then there's ones like Bored Bowser's Sub in Dire Dire Docks, which is not a tough call at all. It's essentially a free star for showing up. And that's not a bad thing per se. It can be a relief every now and then having an objective that's simple and unchallenging. Sort of like how in music a bar of rest could be considered a note, just a note of silence, as it were. Of course, if you follow that line of logic too far, you end up with John Cage's 433, so let's just move on. I'm going to discuss the 2 coin missions together, So the next in line is Mario Wings to the Sky, in which you have to get back on the floating island, then use a combination of the wing cap and a cannon to soar through the middle of 5 floating coin circles to spawn the star. You could see this as a kind of puzzle, and it does technically involve finding 5 secrets, a challenge also found in later courses like Wet Dry World. But since the secrets are all in a row here, it's not a very deep puzzle, is it? Instead, I would describe this more as a platforming with a power-up type of challenge. Some people might not consider this a meaningful distinction, since power-ups are less prominent here than in previous games. You could finish the whole game without using any of them. But the challenges that require power-ups are designed in a pretty different way from the rest, so I think of this as a unique type. There are 3 major power-ups in Super Mario 64, all of which temporarily replace his trusty red headwear: the Wing Cap, Vanish Cap, and Metal Cap. Each power-up is unlocked throughout the castle by finding a red, blue, or green switch in one of the secret stages, a callback to the Switch Palaces from Super Mario World, which spewed colorful blocks all over Dinosaur Land. Red blocks contain the Wing Cap, the most iconic and useful of the 3, which makes Mario fly after you execute a triple jump or get shot out of a cannon. While flying, Mario can be steered with the control stick to move him around, gain a very slight amount of vertical lift, or dive bomb into the ground. Despite its prominence in Super Mario 64's marketing, the Wing Cap only appears in 3 courses, 2 of which are back-to-back, which is curious because the other power-ups are more spread out. It's possible that Nintendo was concerned that too much flying would make the game's many vertical platforming sections seem annoying by comparison. But at the same time, flying had become an important part of Mario's identity, so they didn't want to leave it out entirely. I don't know, it seems just the teensiest bit dishonest. Anyway, blue blocks contain the Vanish Cap, which makes Mario transparent and able to pass through enemies, metal fences, and certain walls. This is a pretty situational power-up and doesn't have much oomph to it. Not surprising that it's the least well-remembered of the 3 caps. And green blocks contain the Metal Cap, which turns Mario's whole body into solid metal, making him much heavier and invulnerable to damage. Metal Mario sinks in water and isn't affected by poisonous clouds, both of which come in handy in the same place where you discover it, Hazy Maze Cave. If Wing Mario is the pushed-out-in-front face of Super Mario 64, Metal Mario is the opposite, a sleeper success who turned out to be one of the most enduring legacies of this game. The metallic makeover returned in both Super Mario Odyssey and Super Mario Wonder, and as a surprise antagonist, Metal Mario is a fixture in spin-offs, most notably Super Smash Bros. So apart from the coin missions, that leaves us with just one more star in Bob-Omb Battlefield, behind Chain Chomp's Gate. This is a puzzle, plain and simple. You have to walk up to the invincible giant Chain Chomp and realize that ground pounding on top of the post that he's chained to will eventually free him. In his delight at being let go, he smashes into the gate behind him and reveals the star. There are many different puzzles in Super Mario 64, of varying levels of challenge and quality. This one is among the simplest, but it's also very clever and helps a first-time player realize that problems in this game may have unorthodox solutions. One of the cleverest things about Super Mario 64's design is that it doesn't use Mario's fancy 3D moveset just to create new platforming challenges, but also to let him interact with environmental elements in new and interesting ways. Diversity was the name of the game, and puzzle missions are a big part of that. And I do mean big, because I would argue that the collect 8 red coin missions, and the bonus stars you get for collecting 100 coins in every course, both count as a kind of puzzle. Then again, at the same time, they also count as platforming missions, and power-up missions, and really every other type except for racing and boss fights. These are the final exams of Super Mario 64, in which you prove your mastery of the level and Mario's moveset at the same time. And in the case of the 100 coin stars, these often are the toughest missions in the game, which may explain why they aren't listed on the mission select screen and don't kick you out of the course when you collect them. Super Mario 64 is full of interesting challenges, but broadly speaking, every single one is foreshadowed by these first 7 missions you find in Bob-Omb Battlefield: boss fights, races, basic platforming, power-up enhanced platforming, puzzles, and the more varied challenges of collect 8 special coins and collect 100 ordinary coins. The reason I'm harping on this so much is that later 3D Mario games, despite all the changes they made to level design and game mechanics and myriad other things, have still mostly pulled from this list in designing the challenges that lead to game-progressing collectibles. Take Super Mario Galaxy, for instance. Its first level, the Good Egg Galaxy, begins with a series of platforming challenges, then a brief search for 5 special collectibles to generate a launch star, followed by more platforming, and finally, a boss fight. Since you have to deal with enemies and other obstacles the whole time, This first mission has almost the same set of basic challenges associated with it as the journey to King Bob-Omb on top of the hill in Bob-Omb Battlefield. The one significant wrinkle is a sort of mini red coin hunt you go through, a variation on one of Super Mario 64's mission types that rewards you with progress toward a star rather than the star itself. When I talk about future entries in the Super Mario series, one thing I'm going to be sure to take note of is the ways in which each game built on these basic mission types, adding new conditions to each to refresh the concept and make it original. And they did a lot with them, don't get me wrong, but the influence of Super Mario 64 is never so deeply buried that you can't see that CG Mario face winking at you underneath the surface. One of the most interesting things about Super Mario 64 to me is how big an impact it had on future Mario games, despite striking out in most of the areas I've been considering so far: characters, story, enemies, and gameplay mechanics. In terms of things that stuck around, only the last one makes a strong showing here, and the vast majority of its innovations fall under what I would call general design. The story premise of Super Mario 64, that Peach has been trapped in her own castle by Bowser, and Mario must take back the magic power of the castle to rescue her, was at the same time too simple and too specific to inspire future Mario games. Its most notable aspect is the setting, Peach's castle, which wasn't reused in a 3D Mario game until a considerably downsized and simplified version appeared in Super Mario Odyssey. The castle is an important symbol to Mario, like the Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella castles are to Disney, but no other game uses it the way Super Mario 64 does, as a level hub and the home of most of the game's secrets. Funnily enough, the Mario RPGs do a lot more with the castle than the main games do. The final boss fights of both Paper Mario and Mario and Luigi Partners in Time take place there, and in Partners in Time it serves as the level hub too. By the way, who would have thought that Super Mario 64 and Partners in Time would end up sharing something this essential in common? This is almost as good as Ocarina of Time and Phantom Hourglass ending up together in that Zelda video I did last year. As for the other half of that first category, Super Mario 64 didn't introduce any major characters to the series, but it's only fair to credit it with a few small refinements. For instance, it reintroduced Toads as friendly NPCs, and gave them unique dialogue for the first time, arguably doing for their image what Yoshi's Island had just done for the Shy Guys. It's easy to forget that in 1996, Toad hadn't appeared in a normal Mario game for around 7 years, since the release of Super Mario Bros. 3 in 1988. Yoshi kind of booted him out of the franchise for a while, and this game reversed that trend by elevating Toad and giving Yoshi just a minor cameo. These days, Toad is a much bigger part of the Super Mario series than Yoshi, who's drifted into more of an independent role as the star of his own sub-series, and that's a development that definitely began with this game. Super Mario 64 also marks the first appearance of penguins as a friendly NPC type. They were a natural fit for the snowy levels, and while I'd bet that Nintendo didn't originally expect them to join the stock NPC pantheon, they've been in 3 other mainline Mario games since then, not to mention the Paper Mario series. There are a few other small things, like Talking Boos and the Loch Ness Monster-inspired Dory, who returned in Odyssey, but none of this is on the same level as a new major character, or even the Koopalings from Super Mario Bros. 3. Then we have enemies. Super Mario 64's new enemies have kind of a thrown-together quality to them. They're very geometrical and garish, like characters from a really early computer-generated cartoon, and most of them look like something you could make in 5 minutes with some silly putty, a bag of pipe cleaners, and a couple of cans of spray paint. The most important new enemy is probably Womp, the big stone slab with legs who waddles around trying to headbutt you into the ground. He got a whole level named after him, and he showed up in a handful of later games, but he's not nearly as prominent as his brother from another mother, Thwomp. We also have Amps, basically Podoboos except electrical and in 3D, which are a staple of the new Super Mario Bros. Games for some reason, and Skeeters, very clearly inspired by Water Striders, who managed to swing an appearance in Super Mario Sunshine and a few levels of Super Mario Galaxy 2. When we come to gameplay mechanics, we're on much firmer ground. Super Mario 64 introduced a set of jumps and bounds that would serve as the foundation of Mario's 3D movement, all the way through to Super Mario Odyssey, and probably well into the future. The idea of sequential jumps giving you greater vertical reach is crucial to the design of many levels, and it feels so natural here, it's easy to forget that previous Mario games didn't have this feature. Punching and kicking to attack didn't last long, being replaced by water spraying in Super Mario Sunshine and the spin attack in Galaxy. But the ground pound and mid-air dive are still very relevant today. The mid-air dive in particular is a key component of the super flexible movement seen in Super Mario Odyssey, which allows players with good timing to travel vast distances without ever touching a platform. I also think it's worth noting that Super Mario 64 was the first game in the series with a generic interact command that allowed Mario to read signs, talk to NPCs, and carry objects around with the same button used for punching. Context sensitivity was used here not just to make Mario himself more dynamic, but to create a world that he could really interact with, instead of just watching it speed by from left to right. Where we really hit the jackpot, though, is general design. Super Mario 64's overall structure was highly influential, with a hub area leading to individual worlds full of self-contained missions, as well as a few bonus collectibles accessible directly from the hub through secret stages. Sunshine did this with Delfino Plaza and its links to the various resorts around Isle Delfino, and Galaxy repeated it with the Comet Observatory and the dozens of galaxies it overlooks. Galaxy 2 was the first 3D game in the series to break this precedent, adopting a more traditional world map in the vein of Super Mario Bros. 3, but it still had a hub and still used missions to break up its levels. From there, the concept was modified even further, with Odyssey dispensing with the hub and introducing a new mission structure in which only some main collectibles would lead to a stage reset, with most only briefly pausing the action. Nevertheless, the concept is a robust one and could easily be used again. But in addition to their structure, the nature of Super Mario 64's worlds was a big influence on other games, both within and outside its own series. Mario games had always had a certain fantastic quality about them, particularly Super Mario World, with its candy-colored switch palaces, and areas with names like Donut Plains and Choco Island. But in a 2D environment, the craziness of the level design was purely an aesthetic choice. In Super Mario 64, you don't just see crazy things, you do crazy things, and the game gives you a wide variety of appropriately themed arenas to do them in. These courses range from low-fidelity simulations of a real place, like Cool Cool Mountain, Jolly Roger Bay, or Shifting Sandland, to more tropey fictional concepts. Big Boo's Haunt as a haunted mansion, Whomp's Fortress as a castle in the sky, etc. And at the far end of the realism scale, worlds that are so abstract and gamey that they defy comparison to any real location, like Wet Dry World, Tick-Tock Clock, and all 3 Bowser stages. Not all of these places are what you'd call immersive, but each one has an immediately recognizable style, which complements the challenges you find in it. The worlds in Super Mario 64 are the most memorable parts of it, and that made it unique. I'm just going off of my own personal experience here, but while I love the worlds from Super Mario Bros. 3, I think it's the power-ups, and even more so the new enemies, that stick out in my mind after playing it, rather than the worlds and their themes. And with both Super Mario World and Yoshi's Island, it's not the worlds that I remember so much as individual stages. World 1 in Yoshi's Island is never going to be as iconic as the stage Touch Fuzzy Get Dizzy, which appears in it. And in Super Mario World, the worlds aren't even that consistent. You find underground stages in Donut Plains, and an underwater one in the Forest of Illusion. Nintendo EAD's dedication to respecting the world themes they came up with was always tempered by the desire for variety inside each world. But with Super Mario 64, world design took center stage. Because you were visiting the same course every time you went back for another mission, rather than playing a new stage entirely, consistency was now just as important as variety. You had to believe that this was the same place, whether or not all the same things were there, for the game to even make sense. So they put more thought into each one's overall theme, and the result was a set of very memorable worlds. And this was just the beginning. Most of Super Mario 64's flaws, if you can even call them that, stem from the fact that it was the first of its kind. Like a real-world dollhouse, the courses in Super Mario 64 make a little bit of detail go a long way, with the gap being papered over by your own imagination. In retrospect, I don't actually think that's a defect, but later games that adopted the same template did more to sell the atmosphere, like Rare's Banjo-Kazooie, with its chatty protagonists and abundance of theme-appropriate NPCs, or Naughty Dog's Jak and Daxter, with its deeper history and more fleshed-out narrative. The gates had been thrown wide open. From late 1996 onward, Nintendo EAD could take the 3D Mario concept and go in pretty much any direction their imaginations carried them. And then a peculiar thing happened, not dissimilar to what had happened after they released Super Mario World half a decade before. They ran out of ideas. Okay, more accurately, they ran out of good ideas for Mario specifically. See, the difficult thing about making a great game with limitless possibilities for expansion is that, well, because it's so great, it's hard to improve on. And if there's 100 ways to make your game more interesting, how do you pick just a few of them so the next game isn't in development for 15 years? Ultimately, while they took almost a decade to give up on the idea of a Super Mario 128 that would be just as revolutionary as Super Mario 64 had been, in the meantime, their next Mario game would turn out to be both more and less than Nintendo fans expected. Miyamoto felt that it was basically a retread of Super Mario 64 with a different look. But kind of like with The Wind Waker, a game which released in the same year, this new look and the approach it signified was strange enough to make some fans feel that Nintendo had lost the Mario thread completely. But of course, they should have been used to that by now. Breaking tradition in the Mario series isn't just an occasional quirk. It's a tradition.